While 16th century Europe was bursting with innovation, life for the Jews had remained unstable, marked with violence perpetrated by a corrupt Catholic Church. Inspired by an era of innovation and disgusted by the malfeasance of the Church, a monk named Martin Luther sparked one of the largest revolutions in the history of Christianity and permanently altered the course of Judaism. In the early 16th century, after a string of popes embroiled themselves in scandal, the Catholic Church was overrun with corruption. Even though officially the Church took on a vow of poverty, the Church tyrannically acquired money to finance its numerous projects. Perhaps the worst of these schemes was the sale of indulgences, a policy which allowed money to be exchanged for forgiveness from sin and access to heaven. Disillusionment with the Catholic Church reached an all-time high when Martin Luther decided that Reformation was necessary. After spending the first part of his life as a monk and devoting himself to fasting and long hours in prayer, pilgrimage, and confession, Luther reached the conclusion that the Catholic Church had lost its way. In 1517, at the age of 34, he gathered his proposed reformations into a document titled the 95 Theses and nailed it to the front doors of the cathedral in Wittenberg. His core principle was that the Bible itself, rather than the priests' or popes' interpretation of it, was the single highest authority. Instead of confessing to a priest, he believed that every Christian could communicate with God directly. As fame of the 95 Theses spread, Luther's growing reputation allowed him to preach about his other scholarly and philosophical disagreements with the Church, the Catholic Church's exploitation of indulgences, a Christian's relationship with God and their priest, and the complex connection between faith and reason. The Catholic Church, in turn, retaliated by trying him for heresy in 1521. Rather than silencing him, however, this act simply propelled his fame and success. He returned to Wittenberg and began practicing Protestantism, a new movement aimed at both returning Christianity to its biblical roots and modernizing it to match the progressive era of the Renaissance. At first, the Jews had high hopes for the Protestant movement. Life in 16th century Europe had been a gamble for them at best, marked with sporadic waves of violence that could be triggered by anything from the outbreak of plague to the whims of local politicians. Since returning the Church to its biblical roots was at the core of the Protestant movement, this new movement created great potential for common ground with the Jews. Luther believed that Christians should build deep relationships with Jews in order to accurately convey Jesus' love. He also understood the Jews' reluctance to convert to Catholicism, since it was riddled with corruption and misinterpretation of the Bible. If I had been a Jew and had seen such dolts and blockheads govern and teach the Christian faith, I would sooner have become a hog than a Christian. But unfortunately, this new alliance didn't last, and Luther's positive attitude to the Jews drastically changed. Just like the Catholics, Luther wanted to have one all-embracing Christian church and believed that his return to a pure biblical Christianity would inspire the Jews to convert to his new faith. Following a similar path to Mohammed almost 1,000 years earlier, his conversion mission failed, and Martin Luther's antisemitism revealed itself. By 1543, Martin Luther published On the Jews and Their Lies, a 60,000-word anti-Semitic treatise. He advocated for setting synagogues on fire, confiscating Jewish prayer books, forbidding rabbis from preaching, and smashing Jews' homes. As Protestantism swept through Western Europe, bringing anti-Semitism with it, many Jews were confronted with the violent plundering, destruction, and murder of pogroms that had become all too familiar to them. Many fled to Eastern Europe, to the areas that Protestantism hadn't reached. Jews in Germany, France, and the Netherlands, where Protestantism was most fervent, suffered the most. The biggest tragedy of the Protestants' antagonism towards the Jews is that the two groups initially had so much in common. Many Protestant sects saw the law and values of ancient Jewish society as a basis for the creation of a model modern society. In 1775, for example, the Protestant president of Harvard echoed this sentiment: "The Jewish government, according to the original Constitution, which was divinely established, if considered merely in a civil view, was a perfect republic." Luther's legacy of anti-Semitism would live on far after him, manifesting most grotesquely as some of the core literature and teachings of Nazism. His work was often quoted by Hitler and corrupt religious figures. In 1938, for example, a bishop in the Evangelical Church distributed a pamphlet called Martin Luther and the Jews, Away with Them. The pamphlet claimed that the Nazis were acting as true Christians, precisely as Luther would have wanted. Although the 16th century Jews would rebuild after the initial spread of Protestantism, Western Europe would never again be an epicenter for the Jews. Instead, Eastern Europe, Poland, Lithuania, the Ukraine, and Russia, subsequently emerged as the heart of European Jewish life and would see a flourishing unmatched since the time of the Second Temple.
Up next, less than 100 years later, the most horrific massacre since the Second Temple shatters the center of Jewish life.